Hello, everyone, and good morning. Welcome now on day 15 of reading the 40 chapters of Exodus during the 40 days of Lent. Good to have you all back with me today, as I'm getting out a little bit later of a video now at 6:15, as I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, and preparing for some events today. So we left off with the events at the Red Sea, where Pharaoh had finally released the Hebrews. They made their way to the sea. They were backed up on one end, the sea, and on the other end, here comes Pharaoh's army, his horsemen with chariots. There God parts the waters. The Hebrews walk through, and then the waters close in on on the Egyptians, thus bringing quite a humiliating end to a sequence of humiliating factors, throughout the course of the plagues. Chapter number 15. Then here is this collective song at the after those events. It's a song of liberation. It is a liturgical act. Here throughout the book of Exodus, the collective, as best we can tell, that they've been cautious at receiving Moses and embracing his leadership, and, psychologically speaking, for good reason. They had been many generations under slavery, and so the challenge was in embracing something new. Right here in chapter 15, for the collective group, the nation of Israel, this is their first real liturgical act. Remember, when they go to Egypt, they're but a household, maybe a clan there of Jacob. Now they're leaving as a nation. Here they're singing of the triumph of God in verse 1, that he has saved them. Their praise to God. Verse 3, that God is a warrior. He threw the chariots into the sea. Verse number 4, that they fell like stones to the bottom of the water. Then they ask the question, or make the statement of those that rise up against God, that they will be overthrown. God, in this rich imagery, with the blast of his nostrils, basically the blowing of his nose, he calls the waters to pile up. And verse 9, when the enemy thought that they were going to be able to exploit the Hebrews again, there God destroyed them by blowing his breath. Verse 11, God is unparalleled. Verse 12, he stretches out his right hand, and the earth swallowed the enemies. God's redeemed his people. The nations are going to hear about this, and they're going to have fear and dread because of the great reputation of their God at this point. Nations are going to be concerned as they march through the promised land, or onward to the promised land. In verse 17, it says it talks about the planting his people in the mountain of inheritance. Very compelling language here. The concept of inheritance is something that was lost in 430 years of slavery. And here, once again, you have a people that start to be very forward-looking in terms of thinking about inheritance. And then in verse number 20, Miriam, here the sister of Aaron and Moses, she's identified as a prophetess here. And so it's she's the first one, the first individual in Scripture identified as being a prophet. She's got a drum in her hand, and she and all the women go out with drums, and they began to dance. And so early on in chapters 1 and chapters 2, women were at the forefront of these events. The women were resisting Pharaoh in a very intriguing and self-assertive and rebellious way, and here being led by the prophet Miriam, or Mary when it's translated from the Greek into English, it's Mary. From the Hebrew in English, it's Miriam. They're going to be playing this music and dancing, and here a prophet speaks, and this is what Miriam speaks in terms of song. Verse 21, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and its rider he has thrown into the sea." And so this is quite an amazing picture of the collective. However, as I almost wish that this chapter concluded with that picture of the very compelling features of their worship, but it doesn't. We've, in the course of history, it was decided to continue on in an additional pericope, verses 22 through 27. It kind of ends this chapter on a sour note, as it were, no pun intended. They're making their way through the wilderness for 3 days. They're looking for water. I mean, this is, here we just came out of a scene where God controlled the water, and now his people are looking for water to drink. That they come to Marah. However, the water there is bitter. Something's wrong with the water. And so the people began to complain in verse 24. The same ones that were singing God's victory previously, now they're complaining. And imagine the pressure upon Moses. He's led the people out, and now he has to attempt to nurture and secure most of their needs. He cries out to God, and here God shows him a tree. Moses throws the tree into the water, and it makes the water whole somehow. The water goes from being bitter, poisonous, whatever the issue with that water is, to being clean and being consumable. And he said, if you will diligently obey the Lord your God and do what is right in his sight and pay attention to his commandments, keep all the statutes, then all the diseases that I brought on the Egyptians I will not bring on you, for the Lord, I the Lord am your healer. And so that really, it leaves things off quite interestingly. Here is this testament to God's great and mighty acts. But then the concerns of the people, will God act again? And then the benediction is, if you do what's right, God says, then you're not going to have any concerns with this bitter water or disease. And really that's a interesting bridge into what's the variety of things that we will encounter as we continue this study. All right, I will pause here, and I will meet you again tomorrow on Saturday for our last reading of this week. And of course, as always, if you have any questions or comments, concerns, or anything like that, please shoot me a text message, email, or any way you know how to get in contact with me, and I'll address whatever it is your concern might be. Thank you all for joining with me.